Welcome back to the Lipoedema Podcast. We are your host, Shell.
Tiana, and today we are joined by special guest, clinical naturopath, nutritionist and neuroscientist, and the founder of Women's Integrative Health Clinic, Renee Grandi. Renee, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you so much for having me. It's lovely to be here.
Well, we hear so much in the community about perimenopause and menopause and it being a time of concern. So we really are excited to talk to you today about what it actually is. So, Renee, what is perimenopause?
Okay, so there's so much that we can go through with this topic, with lipedema. Perimenopause is where your ovaries are reducing the amount of hormones like your estrogen, your progesterone, your testosterone. That will result in an increase in your follicle stimulating hormone to kind of get through those last follicles and eggs. And then your adrenal glands that sit on top of the kidneys will start producing the estrogen and the testosterone. So it's really the conversion from your ovaries creating hormones to your adrenals starting to take over. And of course, from a spiritual perspective, a woman entering into her matriarchal cycle, the time when she's no longer, it's all about sex and appearance, and she's entering her next level of wisdom and being the family leader, and like kind of really it's all about, from a spiritual perspective, the wisdom side of things, really finding your inner wisdom.
I love that, because we do learn so much, like as mothers, and then to raise a family, and then and because we're on this earth to procreate, aren't we? So we have
Exactly.
That whole chapter of our lives geared towards procreation. And then once that's done, it's we're the wise elder folk.
Exactly. Women can really find themselves a lot more in this journey. It's about, you've lived so many years, so many trials and tribulations that, it's a different era. And I think it's been termed more as like a disease, and that it's a deficiency, but really it's a completely different transition. It's just a new transition that needs to be nourished and supported in the right way.
Yeah, so it comes down to education really, and learning what this next part of our body's journey is going to be like. So how is it defined and diagnosed? How do we know we're in perimenopause?
So if you're in perimenopause, you'll generally have quite a significant increase in your follicle stimulating hormone. So that's generally about 30 international units. You'll have changes in your signs and your symptoms. You'll have more of the hot flush side of things. You'll have a reduced estrogen. Well, see, the thing with perimenopause is that you're also going to have fluctuating estrogen. So you're really going to have erratic estrogen. And this, when it comes to lipedema, is where things start to get that pathogenesis starting a lot. It's the fluctuations in the estrogen and the progesterone side of things.
So what are the symptoms in perimenopause that are both common and then less common for women? Can we get into that?
So common and less common signs and symptoms, I would say common would be starting your hot flushes, your erratic cycles, your insomnia, your sleep issues, the excessive heat, the waking up at 3 a.m., the irritability, weight gain side of things. And then less common associated, I would say changes in your hair and your skin, the itching, the feeling like bugs are crawling underneath your skin side of things, the thyroid changes, the libido changes. So there's a lot of different signs and symptoms that occur because it's a completely different transition. You're transitioning from what you've known for the last 45 years to a new era of life.
There's so many, I've been reading so much about it lately, and Tiana and I have spoken about it before. So I'm 50 and I never knew about cycles of my period. I just knew, around every 28 days I bleed. I knew nothing about all of the different cycles. Tiana will say she's in a luteal phase or something. I'm like, yeah, what's that, mate? I have no idea. So there is so much education to be done around this and what to expect, and at what point do you go to the doctor and say, hey, I need some support?
I think when it's really starting to affect your life, and I think that it's really when you're chronically fatigued, where you feel like it's starting to interrupt your work. But really the main thing that they're going to tell you is that you'll need to take hormone replacement therapy, because they're not looking at things in a different perspective, that it is more of a transition. The ovaries are reducing down their hormonal output because they have less of the ovarian reserve, and that has to shift to the adrenal glands creating those hormones. And also, and this is where it'll be very interesting from the lipedema perspective, is the fat cells and the hormonal reserve that creates as well. So really, if you start to notice these changes, your estrogen is going to be very erratic. It's going to go up and down in perimenopause until you get to menopause, where you have that 12-month period without a period. Your progesterone is going to go down generally first. So that's where a lot of the mood swings come in. The periods become irregular. They might be short one cycle and then long the next. The hot flushing, and because the progesterone can go down, what tends to happen in perimenopause is that your estrogen can also be fluctuating really rapidly and going up to kind of get the last ovarian reserves and follicles stimulated, but also because it's in a estrogen dominant perspective from low progesterone. So you have a couple of different things going on there. And then from the testosterone perspective, your testosterone is generally going to be decreased as well during this time, because your testosterone actually converts into estrogen. So if you look at the hormonal pathway, you have the DHEA, which is basically like your sex hormone precursors, and that gets converted into testosterone. Testosterone gets converted into estrogen by an enzyme called aromatase, and that estrogen is really important in perimenopause. So that's a lot of where that lower testosterone, low libido, low metabolic rate, inability to break down fats as well as what you would have before premenstrually, that's where that really comes in, because it's a defense mechanism. Estrogen takes priority during this transition. So the body is going to do everything it can to defensively regulate and modulate the estrogen. And I think from a lipedema perspective, this is what I'm going to really try and push, is that so many women feel like their bodies are really against them because they don't have the right strategies, or they haven't been told more about the actual pathogenesis, that it's so multifactorial, but it's a defense mechanism. Every single thing that your body is doing for lipedema is always going to be to defend abnormal pathways that are occurring. And particularly when it comes to perimenopause, there's such a huge shift. So based on your predisposition of where you are during that transition and your genetics, that's where that really comes in.
All of those symptoms that you mentioned earlier sound quite unpleasant. And I like the reframe of it being like a change in your life's journey, like through to wisdom and the matriarch. But it sounds like kind of a bummer, and I'm nervous about it all. You know, Shelley and I have at different age brackets, but something intrinsically in me feels like after I move from like postnatal, I'm going to go pretty quickly into perimenopause. And that scares me because the postnatal journey was quite erratic. Mm-hmm. My menstrual journey is quite erratic. And so I can imagine I'm going to have quite a tremendous time getting through my perimenopause journey, which how long would the average perimenopause journey last, Renee?
Depends on the person, but maybe 8 to 10 years. So it's going to start about 10 years beforehand, where you might start to notice these changes, and then things might ramp up later. But there is so much you can do from an integrative perspective to really support perimenopause. And this is what I have done for so many clients, because like you really can if you have the right support and you know what you're actually supporting strategically. There is no reason.
That's so nice to hear.
Really, really suffer. You will have changes, you know, like for instance, the hot flushes, all of that kind of stuff. Again, that's a defense mechanism to support hormones, to support metabolism. But if you're looking at your thyroid, your metabolism, your insulin, trying to add in your phytoestrogens, you know, herbal support for your hormones, your adrenal glands, you're going to have a really nice transition. It's just more about knowledge in that area and finding the right person to support you. because unfortunately it's just not common.
Yeah, you're so right. And that's why I'm so grateful that we're talking to you. I've heard that the perimenopausal journey can be really tough if you've spent most of your life, your menstrual life, I suppose, putting stress onto your body, like, chronic dieting and chronic stress and not looking after yourself. I wonder whether that's easily reversed in the short period that we might have knowing that information, knowing that the perimenopause journey is not very far away. Like, how long do we have to spend in a state of, rest and digest and not chronic, and not eating at a calorie deficit? And how long might we have to reverse that so that we have a better journey?
Honestly, you can start to change things within like 3 months, I would say. I really think the body wants to heal. The body is always wanting to heal, and everything that it's doing always comes from a defense mechanism to try and support those pathways. What happens is that when the defense mechanisms take too long because they're not being supported strategically, that's when it becomes more chronic, and then it becomes really progressive. And it's no fault of the person. It really is just that we just are only really getting into the integrative and holistic perspectives and looking at the body systemically instead of looking at, okay, menopause is just an estrogen decline. It's not just an estrogen decline. It's everything. And if you've been stressed for a really long time and you've had, chronic illnesses before, again, the body always wants to change. So it really just takes being supported and nourished and finding, getting that comprehensive pathology done, having someone look over with a fine-tooth comb and going, okay, well, we want to make this optimal. We want to get this there, and focusing on a specific treatment protocol for that individual. So that's where naturopathy, nutrition, integrative care is supreme. Hormonal stuff. Because women are always under-investigated. We really are under-investigated. It's just such a notorious thing. So there's hope. There's so much hope.
So nice to hear.
Yeah.
You spoke a little bit about lipedema and perimenopause, but we're hearing a lot of our warrior stories, especially the women who are in menopause now.
Mm-hmm.
If they have managed to keep their lipedema stable for most of their life, even if they didn't know they had lipedema, but they, lived a healthy lifestyle and kept everything stable, once they hit perimenopause, we're hearing that their lipedema blows up. And that's when they finally get diagnosed. So people are getting diagnosed really late in life.
Mm.
How does perimenopause affect the progression or symptoms of lipedema?
Okay, so this is where we're going to break things down a lot, because it's not just the estrogen, okay? So when we're getting into the perimenopause, first thing that's going to drop is your progesterone. From a progesterone perspective, this has a lot to do with your aldosterone regulation. That aldosterone is going to regulate your fluid. So it is a key regulator of the sodium and the fluid that goes into your cells. So aldosterone regulates blood pressure, but it's very core in regulating the fluid perspective. So when you have decreased progesterone, you have increased aldosterone. That increase in aldosterone is going to really swell the cells and cause the lymph part where you have the swelling of the cells, because wherever sodium goes, fluid is going to flow with it. So that's like the beginning part. So then you have a lot of pressure on the cell. The cell has more fluid, more pressure. What we call the intracellular matrix and the extracellular matrix becomes compromised because there's so much pressure. You then have expansion. And then because of that, you can have more lymphatic congestion. So the lymphatic congestion is really going to be a key player here. And we'll come back to that, because with lymphatic congestion, this is where it gets really multifaceted, because there you've got one predisposition, okay? Then think about it if you have had some sort of long-term chronic inflammation, which most people do have in some way, and especially getting into that age, you're going to be a lot more predisposed to some sort of inflammation. You're going to have an increase in the pro-inflammatory compound accumulating in that cell. So think of it, you have more sodium, you have more fluid, you have more inflammation going into that area. And then that's going to deplete and create a poor environment surrounding that cell. Yeah. And that's really when that hypoxia comes in, and you have increased fat, but you have decreased vascular support. So you don't have the fresh blood flow going through it. You have a lot more of that inflammation, a lot more of the congestion that comes with that. And then from there, you have more pressure on the vascular wall, the vascular integrity of inside the cell as well. And then the fibrotic tissue that accumulates from that degenerative environment. So anytime there's going to be a lot of inflammation, you're going to see some sort of degeneration. And based on the genetic transcription happening for that cell, that's going to change where the problem occurs. And in this case, it has a lot to do with the genetic transcription occurring for the tissue, the fibrotic tissue itself within the fat cells. Does that make sense? I know that was a bit long-winded.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. And what's coming to my mind is like all of the efforts that we put into our lymphatic health as lipedema women, and the movement, like the gentle movement and the manual lymphatic drainage and the vibration, and like that's all key for the management through this state. Like it's not the be all and end all, but like that seems to be key. The more we move our body, the more we move our lymph. It needs help.
Yeah. So that's just the progesterone kind of inflammatory side. Now there's the estrogen side. So as you're going through perimenopause, what I said before as well is that ovarian reserve starts losing its hormonal capacity. So you have depleted or erratic estrogen. And with that, you have a lot more pressure on the adrenal glands. So from perimenopause and when you've entered menopause, because your ovaries are no longer producing that, your adrenal glands, that's the primary producer of your hormones. So you have the DHEA, core precursor to your estrogen and your testosterone. So DHEA gets converted into testosterone. Testosterone gets converted into estrogen. When your estrogen is low, that adrenal gland is going to really want to spike your estrogen, but then your fat cells are going to take over as well. There's two aspects here that are really, three aspects really here that are important when it comes to estrogen, is that if you put pressure on the adrenal gland is your core regulator for your stress response. So, and this also links into progesterone as well, because cortisol steals progesterone. Progesterone is a precursor to cortisol. So that's going to be another dip for your progesterone if you're under a lot of stress, which many women still are, around that time. They're still working full time. They still have a lot of stress. There's huge life changes that are happening around that time. So then what if your cortisol is going to increase? Then you have reduced capacity to create estrogen. You have reduced capacity to create testosterone because it's all going to get converted cortisol. So there's that aspect. So this is why stress management is so important. And some people don't even know that they're stressed. So it's really important to kind of find that and look at that as a key element. Then if you have estrogen levels dropping, the fat cells that are going to be created during that time are going to be genetically transcribed to increase that adipose tissue. It's going to increase the estrogen receptors in the fat. So the fat cells will have more estrogen receptors, which means it's going to support perimenopause. On top of that, around this time, the fat cells that are going to be created and expanded, they actually have that aromatase enzymatic activity converting testosterone to estrogen. So that's another defense mechanism of why lipedema is occurring. So it's defense. It's really trying to support your estrogen because women need estrogen. We might need less of it because we're no longer in a menstruating fertile phase, but you still need it as an absolute priority. And so, but when you're looking at a hierarchy in the body, cortisol is always going to take precedence. Like it's going to be the first thing because it's going to be fight or flight and survival. So there's that. On top of that, estrogen really regulates your nitric oxide and your ability to vasodilate. So that is really there to support the blood flow. That blood flow is very important for getting nourishment to the capillaries to the lymphatic system to the fats.
It's huge. It's so multifaceted. And I'm so glad that you mentioned like within all of that cortisol, because whenever I think of hormones, I always think of sex hormones and not take into account like cortisol, insulin. These are all very important players in all of this as well.
Yes, absolutely. So, if you have that increased cortisol, you're naturally going to have increased blood sugars because, again, that's your body's defense mechanism. It feels stress. It knows that it's going to have to really put that energy out. So you have the increased blood sugar. Then you have, when that becomes more chronic, that's when your insulin resistance starts to happen. You have increased inflammation. And then with lipedema, this is really when it starts to change the genetic makeup of your mitochondria. So your mitochondria is all about your cellular energy, your cellular metabolism, which has a feedback loop with your genetic transcription, inflammation. It really is like a huge, huge player in everything. But women that have lipedema have that reduced mitochondria genetic transcription, as well as, so then you're going to have reduced mitochondrial function, which means that you have reduced cellular energy and conversion of oxygen into energy, which is going to exacerbate that hypoxic condition, which then exacerbates the degenerative environment and increases the fibrosis of the fat tissue.
Mind blowing.
Crazy, right? And it's like, it's all cellular, isn't it? Like, so if we, instead of just going, oh, I need to look after my lipedema, I need to look after my perimenopause, I need to look up, like, if we look after the cells and give the cells what they need, maybe that could be, a good place to start.
It's all cellular, but everything when it comes to the cell is super multifaceted. When it comes to perimenopause, we have the hormonal aspect for the sex hormones. We want to, and we'll come back to this at the end of holistic ways to increase that. So we want to look at the estrogen, progesterone, the testosterone. Then we want to support the adrenals. Then we want to support the inflammation. We want to support the mitochondrial health and the immune system aspect and the vascular integrity. So because the nitric oxide is going to change how well you vasodilate, that's going to put a lot of pressure on the vascular capillaries and the structure of that vascular integrity. And that really then makes the capillaries become porous. So we want them to be nice and tight, but they'll become more porous, and they call it like leaky, just like leaky gut, like leaky brain, all of that kind of stuff. Everything really comes back to the vascular integrity of keeping it nice and structured compared to it being porous. Because when it becomes porous, you have your vascular system, and right on top of that is your lymphatic system. And then surrounding that is your fat cells. So we really want to make sure that the inflammatory compounds are not getting pushed too much into the lymphatic system, because that lymphatic congestion is really going to cause that pain as well. The pain and the swelling that comes from that, and this is from like the neurological perspective from it, is that all of that inflammatory buildup is going to cause more what we call cellular debris, because there's so much trying to happen to regulate the inflammation that it can't keep up. So you have a lot of debris, like waste, and then that builds up. And in your lymphatic system, to support the flow of that fluid, the interstitial fluid, you have these little channels. They're called aquaporin channels, and they're like little bridges, but they get clogged. And that's another reason why the cells can really become hypertrophic, because they're going to expand because there's nowhere to go. So that causes pain. It causes pressure. Then the pain can get worse because your body is sending signals to the brain. Help me, like this is an area of concern. And then that can get worse with perimenopause because from a neurological perspective, low progesterone is going to decrease GABA. GABA is really important for relaxation and sleep. It's your inhibitory neurotransmitter. That's really important for pain management. On top of that, from a neurological perspective, through perimenopausal changes, women will often have lower dopamine, lower norepinephrine and adrenaline, because of the cortisol issues. Generally, it'll be high first and then it will go low. And then also lower serotonin. All of these neurotransmitters are really essential for the pain feedback mechanism from the brain to your peripheral and visceral body. So the systemic communication from the brain to the body. You really need those neurotransmitters, dopamine, serotonin, norepinephrine, to shut it off. So if you're predisposed in perimenopause to have lower neurotransmitters because of the neuroendocrine imbalances happening and the adrenals, you're going to feel that pain so much more you can't turn it off. So that's really, again, where it's like this consistent feedback loop that's happening from. This is why it's so multifaceted. And it's not just this one way. It's so many different avenues that you need to look at.
Could also be why people give up, like women give up. They try one thing, but they're only addressing one condition or one symptom of this whole big picture. Like you said, it's multifaceted. And like Tiana said earlier, like we look after our lymphatic system. So that's one element of this. Like we can reduce our pain, reduce our inflammation through that. But are there any specific dietary or lifestyle changes that would help support us through this? And especially our symptoms, lipedema symptoms throughout perimenopause?
Yes. So if we're looking from the estrogen perspective, women really want to be increasing your phytoestrogens. So they're your plant-based estrogens. They're really lovely for helping to balance it out. So it doesn't matter if you're high or low, phytoestrogens are modulatory. They balance. So that's your freshly ground flax seeds. You want to have like a good tablespoon of that each day. Red clover tea, your miso, your fermented soy products like your tempehs. You want to be increasing alfalfa sprouts. So I think, is it sesame seeds might be another really good one there as well. So food-wise, focus on your phytoestrogens. Herbal-wise, there's some really beautiful herbs that will help to modulate estrogen. Your donquai, and that's really nice because it helps to support nitric oxide as well. Red clover is lovely. Shatavari is another really lovely herb for menopause. Your maca root, your black cohosh. And then when we're looking at progesterone, I love like seed cycling. So that's when you're using the freshly ground seeds through, it depends on where you're at for your perimenopause, but it's your sunflower seeds and pepitas are really lovely for the progesterone side of things. Vitex agnus castus, which is chase tree, it's a herb, really supportive for progesterone, and lady's mantle. Then when it comes to, and I mean for progesterone, because cortisol steals progesterone, you really want to be making sure that you're supporting the adrenals there as well. Environmental awareness. What's your job like? What's your relationships like? What's your, like, how is your life? Like, can you change things to reduce stress? That's like number one priority during this phase. And I know it might seem like really indirect when it comes to lipedema, but now you know the cellular mechanisms behind it, you know that that's a really core part is stress management. Herbs, we call them adaptogen herbs that are amazing. Ashwagandha, rhodiola, schisandra, holy basil, passion flower. They're really lovely if you're a very fight or flight, anxiety, stressy person and you're really wired. You want to be supporting sleep, magnesium. So that's for the progesterone side of things and the adrenal side. From an inflammatory perspective, I really like liposomes because they can infiltrate the cells a lot better. They're a lot more bioavailable, easy to digest, and they are known to get into the fat tissue. So liposomes are going to be your best friends with lipedema.
And where do we find those? Are they in a food?
That is no, they're supplements. Yeah, but they're really what you want to be aiming for. So I love resveratrol and CoQ10. So they're really lovely for supporting the mitochondrial health, and curcumin for the inflammatory side. So they're all really good for inflammation, mitochondrial health, getting that cellular debris cleaned out. Food-wise, all of your anti-inflammatory foods, your turmerics, your gingers, lots of your green leafy vegetables. I definitely recommend doing like a good juice every day with celery, ginger, turmeric, alfalfa, red clover, and beetroot, because beetroot is going to be really good for that nitric oxide and the blood health. So a good, 2 glasses of that juice every day is definitely the way to go. But you really want to be super anti-inflammatory, low GI, because we don't want to exacerbate any kind of insulin resistance, especially if you're predisposed to blood sugar dysregulation. But then we just want to make sure that whatever blood you have has low inflammation, because when that blood is going through the capillary to the lymphatic vessels into the fat cell, you want it to be as clean as possible. So that's where that Mediterranean really nice diet comes in. And just as an individual, really looking at where your inflammation is coming from. Like green tea is really nice. From a nitric oxide perspective, your beets are really good. Beetroot all the time is really lovely. Beetroot powder, pomegranate and pomegranate powder. So stick to a lot of your reds, because they're really lovely to support that. So nutritionally speaking, that's what I really like. That's a really nice start, drinking your nice hormonal supportive herbal teas every day. And then when we're looking from the lifestyle perspective, I love castor oil pack therapy. And I know it can be a bit of work when it comes to the large surface area for the legs, but you just want to sit like a towel down, and then soak some good quality, good sized muslin cloths in castor oil, and you want to wrap them around your legs. Then you want to put something over top. Generally you can get even like plastic wrap is fine just to begin with, because the surface area is so big. And then you put a heat pack over top. That's very, very direct. So it's really going to be lovely for supporting the lymphatic system and penetrating the fat cells and moving the blood through a lot. And then you would follow that with your lymphatic massage or your leg compression machine, or your, vibration pad or your rebounder. But I know the rebounders can be hard for some women because of the pain. It can be too much pain, too much pressure. So that's like a really nice one. And then you might even follow that with putting your legs up against the wall for 10 minutes, just to really let it drain out. Otherwise, the infrared light therapy can be lovely. And you would already know about the lymphatic massages and all of that kind of stuff. So you definitely want to be focusing on that too. But I like the castor oil pack therapy because it's very direct and it works well. If you do that consistently, every day or every 5 times a week for about 45 minutes, after a month, you can see some pretty nice changes if you follow it out with a nice massage and lymphatic drain.
Oh, I might look into that. I do that for my tummy. I've got one I put on my stomach.
Yes. So perfect. That's what I mean. It can be a bit more work when it comes to lipedema because it's generally in the legs, but I think it's worth it.
Yeah, I don't have a castor oil pack, but I have castor oil, and I used to put it on my tummy, and I'm like, this is so messy. So I kind of think it's so thick. So I guess getting into a habit like that, just, the admin of it, and just putting that to the side and doing it.
Yes. So try and have the good muslin cloths. They don't make it so messy. And then kind of wrapping it. Get someone to help you wrap your legs, and then put a couple of heat packs around it. And then you want to wrap that again, probably with a towel or a blanket to keep the heat in. But yeah, that's That's what.
I like how you said about 45 minutes, because in my mind I was envisaging like overnight, and like it just is really messy, like in the bed and stuff. So,
Yeah.
and you know, if you've got rats everywhere, I can't imagine sleeping like that. So yeah,
No.
45 minutes is a good call.
Yes. Put on your favorite show. You know, time, like your relaxation time can be your medicinal time. Also, Epsom salt bath.
And in the same vein, like topical magnesium sprays and stuff, you know, we're not soaking in it, but putting it on your body, that's good too.
Yes, that can be really nice. Grapefruit is an essential oil that's really lovely for the lymphatic system. So you can add that in your jojoba. And just on the vascular support, the teas would be more, or like your supplements or your herbs. Horse chestnut is really lovely, and butcher's broom. And then vascular integrity wise as well, motherwort. Yeah.
We need someone to create a lipedema / hormonal tea for us with all of these things in it.
Yeah, and this is where it really comes in. Sometimes it can just be so much more beneficial to see someone to really see what your best strategy is, and where you're most predisposed. That's where it's good to have to think about it. From a lymphatic perspective, I really like, you know, your cleavers, your burdock root, your dandelion root, red clover is another really good one. Yeah, so they're really nice. They're really nice for your calendula. Calendula is another good one. So you can go back and have a listen to this and see which ones work for you. But yeah.
I think also just for our audience, please make sure whatever medication you're on that it doesn't have an issue with some of these herbal things. So that's why it's really good to go and see someone like Renee who can look at what pharmaceuticals you might be taking, because I know myself, I accidentally was taking something that didn't go well with what I got from the doctor. So I was like, oh, I didn't know that. But because iHerb is so easy to jump on and find something, we really need to look after ourselves. And I think that's the first point of call, is see somebody, get some advice, because you don't want to be putting yourself in a worse position than you can't. Yeah. Don't want to make it worse for yourself.
Yes, exactly. And also seeing someone really takes out the confusion. You know, when women listen to this, they might feel really confused because there's so many different avenues here, right? Where do you start? But you start with what generally feels most relatable. You know, if you're very prone to metabolic issues, and that's a whole different conversation as well, with perimenopause and thyroid issues and, you know, gut health issues and acids and all of that kind of stuff, because
that's another episode, I think, Renee.
Yeah, exactly.
Love to get you back.
Yeah, there's so much you can do. There really is. And I think women really need to remember that. There's so much you can do.
Yeah, I'm curious, Renee, when, like, can we do like a little scenario? So if I rocked up to come and see you and I had lipedema, but I was also experiencing adverse symptoms for, you know, what I would imagine be perimenopause, where do you start with me?
Well, like generally, this is where you want to have a herbal formula, or maybe 3 good supplements that you'll always work on inflammation. So you'll always want to work on inflammation, and that's where the liposomes come in. So maybe like a liposomal human. If you're perimenopause, you know that you're going to have to regulate the phytoestrogen side of things. So you'd want to focus on your phytoestrogens through food, through herbal support. Secondly, you'd really want to support your adrenals. So generally a nice herbal support for perimenopause is going to have something in there like Vitex as well, which is nice for the progesterone side of things. But the adrenals, you know, your ashwagandha, your adaptogens, those are the top 3 that you'd probably want to go for. And then the rest you can do with like your herbal teas and your lifestyle and the dietary intervention side of things. Really low inflammation diet, no alcohol, you know, really just give a 3-month nice detox, not for the sake of trying to lose weight, but more for the sake of cleansing the blood, cleansing the lymphatic system, just detoxing, giving your liver a break, letting the blood really clear out, and then creating a healthy cellular environment to reduce down the fibrotic tissue, the lymphatic congestion, then the vascular. Just in the same way that it all kind of falls in a domino effect in the negative aspect, we want to do the same thing. We want to pull the string the opposite direction. And that's what the body does. It wants to heal.
I hope so.
It does. It really does.
Well, that's so nice to hear, and some really good practical advice for us. But I, all of the things you discussed today, it seems very complex, and I think seeing someone like yourself would be so beneficial, especially because we have both lipedema and our hormonal journey, and they sort of interplay with each other, sometimes dramatically and a lot of times negatively. So if we can see a Renee to help us get back on track so that we don't have such a poor experience during that challenging part of our life, we will be setting ourselves up for success. And that brings us to our last question, Renee. Where can the lipedema community find you?
So you can find me at the Women's Integrative Health Clinic. It's an online women's health clinic. So you just find me at the website. I have a YouTube channel, a TikTok underneath women's_health_specialist for both TikTok and Instagram. So feel free to send me an email. Feel free to reach out, and I'm more than happy to answer any questions.
Awesome. I'll put all of that in the show notes so that our community can find you.
Awesome. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much for joining us. The Lipedema Podcast 2025 is powered by Elegance Lymphatic Care. Lipedema and its symptoms vary from individual to individual. The opinions and advice voiced in this podcast are of a personal nature and used for educational purposes.
Please take away from this podcast what resonates with you, and please see your GP or preferred specialist for diagnosis and healthcare. We are Shell and Tiana from the Lipedema Podcast. Until our next episode, bye for now.